Wait. Again, welcome to everybody. We are online. Thank you for being here. We have a quorum, Trish, correct? And thank you to our guests for also coming to the meeting. Starting with the agenda, I'm covering for Chris, who is on a well-moved vacation. And I would like to go to the report of the audit committee. That would be me. So here we are. We had an audit committee meeting last week. We did approve the minutes from April. We did also review and approve the April 25 financials, which we will go over here. There was a correction that was made in comparison of investments versus cash, which we've asked Diana to look into. We also looked at the 990 in depth. There was a couple changes as noted on the minutes that we asked for, but we did approve it and it will also be presented here today. We had another conversation on the auditor status in terms of the auditors. I believe the staff would say they're a really good team to work with. They're waiting for a proposal relative to the next 3 years, I think it is. And the world of auditing has been a little bit harder for governmental not-for-profits. So the relationship is a good one. Our suggestion and the teams as well is to continue working with them and look and hope that the estimate is a good one. We also had Jim reported on the EDC legal counsel reviewing the acquisition and disposition policy. And that was it. There's nothing further. Unless you'd like to say something, Jim? Okay. I'll move on to review the financial. Excuse me, were there any questions on that before we move on? We'll go through resolutions later on. We'll move on to the review of the financials in the April financials. I will turn it over to Jim to discuss.
Yeah. For the April 2025 financials, the fund balance is 1 million, just over 1,040,000. Of that, we have 546 that's cash, and there's been a change in this month. So at the end of April, it was 500 and 540. Yes, at the end of April, it was 596 cash, but I have 6 invested 50,000 in T-bill because if you recall, we had that issue where our money market fund at NBT was over the FDIC threshold. So 50,000 has been moved into a T-bill for 4 months at 4.275%, which is a little bit over what we have in the money market, but that solves that problem. I did contact other banks, and truly we were getting a better rate than we were going to get at another bank. Not necessarily very applicable. So that leaves 546 as of today in cash and what Kathy was talking about was that I had previously moved that T-bill money market fund to a separate line item. I moved it to investments, and so that it showed it was up against, it was comparing to 0 in December of 2024. So anyway, all of that is liquid now. So we've moved all that up to cash, and next month this is 50,000 in a separate line. Accounts receivable is 143. Most of that is owed from the county, and I expect to get that all in one lump sum. That was just, there was a delay, and not really a delay, but that's just a matter of when the contract was signed. Accounts payable, most of that is actually all of that is for the audit, and that's complete billing for the audit for 2024. It's a total of 14,500, which we don't think we're going to get a better rate anywhere else. Prepaids are the same prepaids every month. It's health, business insurance, rent, and our website maintenance that's filled out every month. Statement of activities. Our income is a little over 300,000. It's 20,000 short on the membership, although memberships are still trickling in. I just received another one in the last month. But that gets netted out by the change in personnel, so, we end up actually 8,000 ahead of budget with some extra savings on program.
Move on to the review of the 90, which is also in your packet.
There are no real highlights with that 90. I would say the change that we made was that Mitch Amato, who left the board in April of last year, was not on the list of board members. But we've gone through the story and everything is accurate, and it was filed on extension. So we will sign it again.
Yeah, we did go through it. I would say more in depth, so, and ask a lot of questions. More questions? Move on to potential board member discussion.
I wanted to introduce Kelly Durway. Kelly is with Stewart Shop. She's been there 30 years as their director of facilities. And she also is a trustee on the EDC, and she serves on the board at Wesley Community. So she's here to get to know us, and then we haven't had a chance in the governance committee to put forth what we look forward to meeting next month, and then we'll come back. Morning, everybody. Morning. Thanks for letting me sit in today. Excited to see how this goes, how this works.
Welcome, and Stewart's is an anchor for this, not just Warren County, but I would consider the region that we serve beyond. Oftentimes, and we haven't met Kelly, but your presence and our team's presence is evident in every community that we serve. If there's a Arrow Bank, if there's a we're oftentimes it's known as Glens Falls National, still up north. But if there's a Stewart's and if there's a Hudson Headwaters Clinic, then that's probably a community that we are doing work in or working with people. And so we are really excited to be able to figure out how to even better align with all of the efforts that you guys are making. But make no mistake, you're already a huge impact.
Very lucky to be a part of the Source family, the Dake committee and the Dake family. They're incredibly generous, and to the point, we chef of our whole Stewart's as a whole is to give back to, and that we are definitely a part of. There's always a Stewart's, and now that we've acquired Jolly, there's always a Stewart's in the market too.
Gary started one of our videos. So we've been on this quest to find somebody from Stewart's for a long time.
Hopefully I'm that person.
Exactly. If there's no further discussion on that, we'll move on to the approvals of the resolutions. We'll do them one by one. I would ask for a motion to approve the April 25th financials. I'll second. Any discussion? If none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, abstained, the motion carries. Move on to the approval of the EDC monthly board of directors meeting minutes from April 30th. May I have a motion for that?
John.
Motion Paul. Second John. Any discussion about the minutes? If none, please indicate aye. You approve? Aye. Opposed, abstained, the motion carries. And the final resolution is the approval of resolution 2025, which we should review there. Oh, this is the 990, excuse me. So the details of it are actually in identified in the file. And I would ask for a resolution for the approval of this particular, the approval of 990. So second, any discussion on the 990? All in favor, please say aye. Opposed, abstained, motion carries. I will turn it over to our president for staff reports and it's.
This past month has been one of the more intense since I've been here. And we've got a number of things that we're trying to do in this meeting, so we'll probably go through some of the details about the work we're doing. We're certainly willing to follow up with you in more detail. We did want to go through. We kind of changed gears a little bit. We were looking at healthcare maybe as the next industry that we'd like to be deeper at, but we wanted to get further into the topic, particularly with the leadership of Sons and Headwaters and with the hospital. And so we swapped it out with craft industries. And part of that was inspired by the fact that the state came through recently with a roadshow that they did at the distillery of Springwood. And it continues to show the state's investment in this particular sector. They have a defined economic development quadrant, and they have real resources attached to it. Sometimes I was kind of taken aback by how many resources they had attached to it. They have an internship program that is specifically tailored to the industry. I believe the only active intern in that program is here in our area. And the other element of this, and I talked a little bit, exchanged some messages back and forth with Melanie, is that these particular facilities are increasingly the cornerstone of the communities that they reside in. That they're filling gaps that go well beyond just a business of interest or a trend in terms of consumer behavior. There, if you go into any tap room, you will see that tap room is functioning in the way that any common space would have over the span of our life. And as membership in civic organizations, religious organizations, school-based organizations decreases, these are increasingly the places where the community comes together. So, John, maybe we can walk through those charts, sure. And then we'll go through the activity associated with business. And then we have a speaker here that we wanted to go into detail about a potential proposal for battery storage on facilities that we want. So we'll do it now. Go ahead.
Sure. Good. We'll start with the craft slides. Third. What we did here, we prepared a map. So we're calling it the southern matter on that craft brewery ecosystem. This is somewhat of an arbitrary decision, but basically takes everything north of Saratoga up to the southern part of Essex County and includes some of Washington County. I think that's kind of more the catchment area that our region has. We compared it to the state, the instance of state map showing all the craft breweries are located in the state. So we have a decent cluster here, and you see on the left side the list of the breweries that we have and what they consist of, where they are. Well, next slide shows the.
Some of it's going so fast that the map can't keep up. So, for instance, Bandstand, which is open in Warrensburg, it's not yet recognized as a state in many other graphics, but they're really open and doing very good business. In Johnsburg, as the sewer continues to develop, there are several potential developments there for developing a skilled breweries and North Creek scale and size as well.
Yeah. The second slide gets more into the economic impact analysis of 12 breweries collectively, what it means to the region. You see there's a multiplier. The state, EDC and the Brewers Association come up with this multiplier, $1.25 billion for brewery. Estimated direct and indirect induced effects from an operating brewery. There's a number of things, but altogether, it estimates an impact from these 12 breweries about $15 million a year in that impact. The jobs front, total job direct jobs that all these breweries collectively have estimated between 72 and 96 full-time equivalents. Does also support indirect induced jobs, 40 to 70. And you see there are positions that taproom staff, breweries, hunters, local suppliers, drivers. It's a good high return investment in the rural areas for these facilities. You see it, Jim mentioned it, people want to go to the outer expenses of the community like Fairbanks. Fairbanks is a good one. There's not a dense community up there of activity. But this becomes a real investment for, maybe we take a break there for a second.
I was asked to advise Paradox when, right at the beginning of when I took the job, they moved from facility they were in, just right near Screw Lake, old bait shop. And then opened the largest brewery, I think, between yours and Fort. And I thought it was crazy. And they were getting a significant state investment. They were deep into the process with ESD, and they were still in the process of figuring out how they would expand their marketing footprint, be able to utilize that whole amount of space and investment. And I was somewhat sheepish about it. I wasn't certain how that was going to work, particularly when I looked at their core numbers that they were attempting to grow off of. And we spent a lot of time there because we have a summer place near Paradox Lake. And I cannot tell you how wrong I was. There's never a time I've been there where there has not been 40 or 50 people there. And that's true in the dead of winter. Its location, access to the Northway, its centrality to so many other places there, whether people are on their way into Lake Placid or deeper into the Adirondacks, or simply going back and forth on the Northway, or the community that it served. It's become really the center of that particular part of the state. And they've been wonderful neighbors as well. They continue to be one of the driving forces in any charitable activity that goes on there. They've created a number of initiatives. They actually crafted one beer because one of the brewer's children is on the spectrum and has learning disabilities. And they actually designed a beer with that child's beer design. And the proceeds from that beer every year go directly into a fund they've created to expand learning disability services in that area. That's an aspect that would never have existed without them, and it's been significant, the resources that they've been able to introduce into that part of New York in a very short period of time. If you ever go by that facility, you'll be shocked. It's in the old frontier town. Yeah, and it represents by far the largest return that the state's been able to invest in trying to redevelop that particular property. I know, Melanie, you have a very similar experience in terms of some of the facilities you guys have built here and on the farm.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these numbers are not surprising to me, but as we share them with other people, always in the room, people are surprised. We actually just participated 2 weeks ago. Yeah, 2 weeks ago in a lobby day in Albany, and one of those we're working really hard on though goes beyond. In the past, they've mostly been about the apprenticeship program or just bringing tourism to our community, or kind of like some things you would expect. But now we're dealing with much bigger issues. As the New York State craft beer scene continues to grow and make such a statement, comes all the next challenges, and that's like wine and grocery is a big bill that we're working on right now with our lobbyists, and that will really affect. You see Paradox, you see Congress, you see something in a grocery store, and that will really affect our tap rooms because the prices are lower for beer in the grocery store. So those are the kind of things we're working on right now to keep our tap rooms thriving, especially with tourism expected to be down this summer. But I definitely said, everything Jim said in terms of whether you are a small, you're a medium max size or you're a Paradox size, breweries just become the cornerstone. Something that people can spend on whether they drink or not. It's friendly space for the most part. They usually have community gathering spaces built into their facilities. And it is nice that they are facilities that employ a wide range of, right, anywhere from tempered staff to we have full-time graphic designers on our staff. We have baristas. We have the span is nice. It brings together a wide group of our town people.
Does that bill have a chance of passing this year?
It does. Yeah. So you can already see wine popping up in grocery stores. If they are maybe saver, they have limited or a lower ABV, like alcohol content. And you see a lot of non-alcoholic spirits. If you go to Hanford, and have has like non-alcoholic store, and those are the first steps to gauging the market for liquor and wine stores and wine. What most likely pass, the liquor stores are fighting it the most because you think of all the family owned. Every time you see a grocery store in that plaza, there's also a family owned liquor store, wine store, and so they're actually working closely with their lobbyists. State level, but yeah, it'll definitely, because there's only so much shelf space for alcohol in a grocery store. And so our distributors will absolutely take some beer off, make room for their son. We look really closely with what's on the yeah, it does have a chance.
Well, so there's a couple of things that became clear to us, and there's an example kind of hasn't even talked about some of the maybe non-obvious benefits. We talked a little bit about the aspect of community, but whether or not a particular community has an active brewery scene or distillery scene or these places along with coffee shops have become identifiable assets for those that are looking for. And that was somewhat surprising. Schools continues to be the single biggest driver for attributes. You know, once somebody decides that they're trying to explore where it is they want to be, but in the top 5 is these assets. I'm not sure that that was true 5 or 10 years ago. It might have been a nice thing, but I don't know that it was a decision maker one way or another. It's also interesting as we increasingly talk to more and more young people, they discern it as whether or not their community is going in one direction versus another. When I engaged with a number of Washington County students, they were very proud to tell me how many breweries have developed in Washington County. And to them, that indicated that their community was keeping pace, that it was staying, it was not something simply to flee. This is important. Is why the state has chosen to invest deeper in it. We haven't even talked about the wineries and distilleries on top of this. But one of the things that is visible in the trends is that this is still tracked under manufacturing in the way that the state tracks jobs. And during a period of time that this growth has occurred in here, it almost directly matches the decline in the larger scale manufacturing that we've had in medical devices and with Finch. And so when you essentially look at where that population and that sector has stayed relatively flat, but it has moved from 1 or 2 larger players to a number of distributed players. And I think it's a continued evidence that our economy is shifting from under us. You could still call this manufacturing, but it's clearly different than manufacturing something that's distributed worldwide as a commodity. It has its own skill set. It has its own culture, certainly has its own visibility to the community, but it has arrived. It is not something that is on the horizon. And I would expect that the growth will continue to occur, listening to what the state's talking about. I would be surprised if 5 years from now, we will not see these numbers at least increase by 50%. There is almost unlimited demand, and this is one of the things that I talked to Christian about when you guys were expanding. Is I worried about where is the top of the market. And the net of that conversation was, well, first you have to make really good beers. But if you make good beer and you have a place that people want to be, then it's very hard for a place not to be able to be viable. And watching how you have developed an ecosystem right around you in South Glens Falls, which is now represented with a cord runs from Milton over that many people associate, especially tourists, associate as a positive, the fact that there's 3 or 4 places to go. I'm sure you see this in terms of some of your visitors. They want to know where the collection of breweries are. And the state continues to invest in creating trails and creating promotions around those collective.
Wineries are great. I love that. You don't, go on a wine trip weekend to one winery. Typically, you go to a place that has multiple craft breweries. So it is helpful. I mean, even just when small breweries in Washington County are helpful to make people want to come to this area because there's 5 places that they can stop at within 45 minutes. And it makes it a destination.
One last thing I would say is one of the challenges we have is that we have Glens Falls and Queensbury, which function at one scale, the rest of the county, which oftentimes functions at a different scale. And it's very almost a direct overlay to what lies north and west of it. So if you go into Hamilton County and Essex County, communities there mimic what our outer county communities look like. A brewery in say a town like Chester is a meaningful change. A double-digit number of employees would be the single largest net new business that would have been seen there in the last 2 or 3 years. And so these things are also aligned with the values of the park. They don't typically, as long as they are developed in a hamlet area that's approved with a land use plan, they don't typically run afoul of the APA or other regulatory processes. Usually the limiting factor is the access to wastewater and the ability to treat. Paradox has its own treatment system, which adds a significant amount of cost to their operation, and part of why their operation is as large as it is. And I think increasingly, if a community like North Creek wants to see this kind of development, it's another reason why they have to make the investment in public infrastructure like wastewater, and another reason why we continue to advocate for those kind of developments. It's not simply a matter of having the sanitation system so that the residents themselves will have benefit for it. There are many industries that are buying it. It will either come if it exists, or they probably can if it doesn't. So this was surprising to me. I don't know if it's surprising to you, but luckily we have an expert who can help us navigate it. And I will tell you that when I moved into this building, or when we moved a number of years ago from Trinity, they had a cake from you guys. And I wrote in the lease agreement that the only asset that we absolutely demanded stay was that cake. And honestly, I think they left everything behind, but they took the cake. Which maybe tells you how important it is staying.
Environment.
Any questions before we maybe move on to the?
Or they have pickleball.
And yeah, we have our most recent client.
That's right. They have 2 courts for pickleball in return.
That's your imagination.
I would just add to it that having grown up in Utica, New York, where there's a brewery there that dates back to Prohibition, and I think was the first brewery to open up after Prohibition. This is critically important to a community that is so important to that city, as you know, and still to this day. And as a kid, to be able to go there and tour that facility and get a free root beer was phenomenal. But I think this is so important, and it's not just common roots. I mean, you go to talk to the town and they're pushing your bear on, you know.
You don't know, we're
The
grateful.
first thing they say, you want to common roots? But I would share this data with Dan Steck and Kerry Warner. With legislation out there, we should be helping to promote this.
Carrie's a huge advocate, and this is really helpful. But yeah, even Utica's a good point. It came up at our lobby day that Utica's dealing with a lot of violent crime right now, and it's really affecting their craft breweries. And we are really fortunate that we have a really strong lobby and a great craft brewer association, because they're stepping in and they're really trying to work with the community, making sure that even walkability, safety in that community is a top conversation point, because it is, those breweries are, the fact that people can walk to those breweries in Utica at every corner is so important to the community. Yeah, so absolutely.
We have some charts in here to talk about the distilleries and the wineries, which are not yet as big a function of the local economy, which will see that they are capable of several wineries. We have several distilleries at the beginning of the interest. I would say we typically get somewhere between 3 and 5 inquiries where people are either looking to exchange or explore these type of businesses that come to us. So we're starting to develop an acumen to it. And then there's another chart in here that talks about some communities that it has essentially become a part of their identity and branding strategy. And the reason we share that with you is whether we want to or not, it's happening here. As I said, state of New York, and Melanie is talking about the strength of their lobby, but the state of New York has clearly invested resources in identifying it as one of the craft hubs of the Northeast and of the United States. There will continue to be marketing, and to not try to couple our efforts, take advantage of that would be silly. If the state is going to commit significant resources in terms of both trying to attract that business, but also attract the visitors that want to be a part of that kind of industry, we need to be present in it as well. So we're trying to figure out all of what those textures will be. In fact, we might want to belong to the organization that you're talking about. And those are examples of tenants that we didn't used to think about. But I think we could add a voice to that talks about how important it is economically to our region, and to that extent, we'd like to do it whether we're a member or not.
Absolutely.
Well, there's a lot to take in here. It will be something that we continue to bring to light periodically now as we become aware of just how significant the sector is in our area. Let's go back to the business activity in front of us.
You know, this chart here shows the bar chart. It had a significant jump this month, nothing in this last 3 weeks ago. There's been a lot of activity in the past 3 weeks. And I think it says we're up about 7 net new engagements and projects. We're up actually, new ones have been more than that. We've moved out some old ones that were just sort of that way, they weren't already. So that's why it's definitely a spike up. But of the stuff that happened this past month, we had kind of a combination of stuff that came to us. So some of it was new development opportunities. To say 3 of them, they're on a pretty good size. They have to do with multifamily. Some of them different types, just inquiries. Some of them are specific projects like the east side, the project on the east side, or Star Building. Also, other ones are just basically developers looking to talk to us about what the market's like, what the opportunities are, what we saw the opportunity being.
Yeah, those are across 3 sectors. We had one that specifically focused on senior housing. And John, this is net of the ones you're already aware of with Queensbury. This is a net new player. And they were here asking us for more data that they could use as they're looking at their own expansion plans to determine how and when they might want to enter this market and where the gaps are. I found that heartening that they see us as a place to go to try to get that information. And it was a really robust conversation we had with them, which we'll read for more. And as this develops, John, I'm sure that there will be more that we'll want to share with you if Queensbury is the target. And others that may be interested in your expertise, may be helpful in us helping them make a decision to invest here. You mentioned the Post-Star building. The Post-Star building has been through a number of iterations, but the current developer has already advanced into the planning process in Glens Falls, a proposal to develop a number of units there, different types, and to expand the facility. It's a very encouraging sign for the east side. No matter what design winds up getting approved there, and to continue to have people living in that close proximity to downtown, but also proximity to Eastfield and to the shirt factory continues to create more momentum in that part of town. And then we had a development meeting with one of the largest scale builders in upstate New York, who came here to talk to us and to ask us about ways they could enter our market and deliver needs that they feel they might be able to help with that no one is doing. And Julie, one of the things they talk specifically about is whether the city would want to enter into discussion with them about redeveloping Zombie. And this particular company has a strategy that they're already embarking on in other parts of New York, where they work with entities that either acquire the land or in possession of tracts of land or houses that are derelict. They then become the entity that does the development as opposed to, say, a land. So they would essentially do the raising of the existing facilities that was required, the change and any environmental issues that are associated with the sites, and then the redevelopment. And they don't need it to be contiguous, which I found to be fascinating. It's a much more of an infill approach where they use a template, but the buildings don't necessarily have to be next to each other. They create a neighborhood feel by having 2 or 3 designs that they put in a general area. Given Glens Falls is 4 square miles, even if you looked at the entire footprint, it's smaller than the area that they're currently doing this work in larger communities in New York. But one of the things that I was really encouraged by is the fact that they now see us as a community that is open to these conversations, and they would like to try to figure out where they can add value. This is not a market that will be as lucrative to them say an Albany market would be or a Syracuse market would be. But they clearly see value in being present in this market. And it was the president of the company who came first. And he brought his entire team because he wanted them to see the area. We wanted them to not just look at it from a GIS standpoint. We spent several hours with them and we've had subsequent meetings with them since.
You share the name.
Well, it's MLB. And this is not,
MLB?
yeah. And it's not somebody who we would associate with this kind of activity. You know, when you see an MLB sign, you know, you typically see it on a big campus where you see it at Duns Falls National. They've developed an entire division that is now focused on these kind of innovative housing projects that will both meet needs of communities as well as add to the housing side. And they're particularly focused on how to align with the incentives that the state has now, because they're some of the most generous incentives in history of HCR. And they developed a working business model that I think is worth exploring.
They applied to last week. They were one of the applicants for last week. Patrick Dowd's got a good list of foreclosed properties and or properties that are facing foreclosure in the city. You may want to look at that.
It's also informing our work at Tech Mounts, because as we evaluate alternatives there, having these kind of developers to get their perspective of what they think in their current models might be either perimeter housing or integrated housing, it could be a part of a different way of approaching that, is part of our study work that we're doing now around how to get effective utilization of that site. And I will tell you, they were immediately excited at the idea of being a part of either one of those things, either downtown or something that's closer to the Northway. I think, John, there may be opportunities for them to talk to you over time as we develop this relationship. They were even interested in, you know, what are the opportunities on the other side of the line, but I don't think that's where they want to start. I think they clearly see either Glens Falls or Queensbury as the place that they'd like to begin the process. These are good developments. You know, this is not us just banging the gong saying that we need more housing. These are now the housing developers who are helping us start to envision what could happen and what would need to occur in order for these things to move forward. The other thing that was big in this pile, John, is the graduation of Startup ADK. We had more than 18. I think it was 18 that we actually handed the certificate to at the ceremony 2 weeks ago. Of those, we are following up with 8 that have specifically either asked to engage in capital raising where they lead to say an LDC loan application, or they've looked for access to other programs that the state or we might be able to connect them to. And sometimes they just come to us because they would like to continue to refine their business plan. Not all of them are in Warren County. This is another really important thing I want to share with you. I'm meeting with Craig Connors later this week. 3 of them are in Saratoga. They not only think that Startup ADK is a good place to go, they think of this organization as being more accessible to how a small business might develop, and particularly if they're in Northern Saratoga County. I'm not surprised by this. And it's not in any way a criticism of SEDC. I think SEDC has a model that has some much bigger players and a much broader scope. And so I think we're going to sit down with Greg to figure out how we can continue to support these things between the two of us. I think the more boundaryless we can be in terms of at least providing, like if we're providing connection to Empire State Development, it doesn't matter which one of us does it. And I think if obviously they're not going to be available for an LDC loan, but if there's support that we can provide, that we would provide to any entrepreneur in the area, and many of these people are residents of Warren County who run businesses in Saratoga. So they think of us as their node. And I think that's okay. There were 2 from Hamilton County. Hamilton County doesn't have any organization like us. And so we're the closest node for them to go. And excited to help them. I'm not sure, again, that we can provide direct loan support to them, at least not with our existing charter. But we certainly can steer them to resources, and we can certainly help them develop their plans. And to the extent that they're successful at building these businesses, they're already demonstrating that the value will accrue to us. they come to Glens Falls for support. They come here for healthcare. They come here to do shopping. And increasingly, they're coming to us because we represent a node that feels like our door is open. Three of these are very exciting ventures here in Warren County, some of which I think could scale up relatively quickly. And we're eager to get those in the process with the EDC. We'll talk more about that.
Great, that's pretty much it for this.
Okay, so when we introduce our speaker.
Karen Snowden is a senior project developer with New Leaf. Guys, you need to us up here.
Sure. Thank you.
New Leaf has approached us. Potential battery storage facility in the Cleanville Business Park. The property quite a lot. Plus, one of the suggestions we brought to the Art and Finance Committee, and one of the suggestions from the committee was have parents come in, they were putting forward, not just the new lease operation, but possibly this particular development, and also some other aspects of it.
Yeah, so before we jump in there, let me just provide context for those of you that have been in and out of this conversation. We have received probably double-digit number of battery storage proposals in the last 2 or 3 years. Oftentimes a very large scale, oftentimes driven by some kind of macro search that's GIS oriented, where our site just shows up as being proximate to a switch, and some entity that doesn't even exist in New York calls us and says, we'd like to do this. So most of those we do not explore with vigor. They're either the scale is inappropriate or their lack of really awareness of the New York and our area is that that's not the case here. Terrence, and he can share with you the work that's been done on in areas next to us and close to us. But the scale, I think, is most attractive to us. Their footprint is particularly condensed. And one of the things that's very attractive to us is the idea of being able to utilize this in areas that would otherwise be undeveloped in some of our business and industrial spaces. Obviously, proximity to switches and the ability to continue to store the power which is being generated from solar farms and other alternate sources of energy is also very attractive not only to us, but I'll let you take it.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to meet you all and present. So our office is New Leaf Energy here in Troy. So we're not far at all. We've got just about 50 people working out of Troy, New York. We've been active in developing solar and battery storage in New York for, I guess, since 2013. The storage piece or the battery piece really came online in New York City at first, where that was an economic use we could sort of make sense around. And then recently, NYSERDA, and today, in fact, is announcing rolling out a megawatt block now to incentivize battery storage in upstate New York. So, and this would be a brand new economic use really for developments in upstate New York now. And it has to do with the climate law, the CLCPA that was passed a couple of years ago, and trying to get to the clean energy standards and how batteries still play into that. So a little bit on my background. I live down in Orange County. As mentioned, our offices are in Troy. I don't have a technical background. I do have the ability to answer some questions today about what batteries do. My background is more in law, and then I was actually a land conservation professional working for the Open Space Institute. And you mentioned South Glen Falls. I was involved in the Big Bend Reserve acquisition from Bench Prime at the time, and had a chance to, in conjunction with visiting you all, hike that last night. So that was nice. Reconnect. I started up in solar as a solar developer in 2020, and then with this most recent opportunity in New York, upstate New York, now batteries. So a quick primer here. Well, if I should point out, first of all, we're talking about 33 Stone Quarry Road, which is that set of parcels that that you all own, which is really strategically adjacent to the Cedar substation.
This Queensbury Park across from the airport.
Yep, so, and, I'm not sure if, our proposal has been shared or at one point, I'm sorry, I don't, I'm gonna pass this around in a bit. This is sort of a little, this is a booklet of safety things that come up around these battery storage things. But what we're looking at is 10,000 square feet roughly. We've been talking, to Jim and to John since November about sort of where to put this potentially, and there's a spot, you know, sort of, I think that would allow continued development in that lot that would still, we could kind of squeeze into directly adjacent to the substation. This battery will be a 5 megawatt battery. We call them 5 megawatt 4-hour batteries. So they can push out 20 megawatts of power over a 4-hour period, which is actually enough power to power about 3,000 homes during that time period. What they're really going to be doing is they're going to be active. This battery is going to be active during the summer months when the demand is at its height during the heat of the day in August, for example, when everybody's got their conditioning going. And why these play a role in decarbonizing is because what National Grid will do typically in those situations is turn on a dirtier burning peaker plant, which would be these older plants, older technologies that are set aside for the purpose of just meeting that increased demand during that time period. So NYSERDA is incentivizing, batteries to come online during those time periods to sort of even out the grid. What the batteries are doing is charging at night when the power is the cost of the power is a little bit cheaper, and the energy mix is cleaner than what is going to be needed in those particular time periods. The use case in New York City is a little different. That's where you have a tremendous amount of load that's 24/7, and the batteries are just acting as an anchor that is evening that out from the point of view of Con Ed. These batteries are they are UL certified, all the required UL certifications, tier 1. These are not like the consumer goods that you might be familiar with, like e-bikes and things like that. These are highly regulated commercial batteries. What I'll do is I'll just add, I didn't bring as many copies as everybody here, but what I'll do is just pass along. You can take a look at when you take a look at this, the first picture that you'll see is a battery that actually we developed in Hawthorne in Westchester that is currently online. You can see it's a pretty tidy fenced in area with some screening that is where once it's built is monitored 24/7 offsite. So what these batteries will integrate are new fire code recommendations that came out after in 2023. There were 3 fires in New York State. They were geographically distributed across the entire state, including one in Long Island, one in my hometown of Warwick, and then one in upstate, further upstate west in New York. I sort of paused the effort on incentivizing these things, and then convened an interagency council to come up with some changes and recommendations. They also, even though the fire code recommendations have not been adopted as final, the incentives that NYSERDA will be publishing today will require that any battery developer integrate those. And those include a variety of things, so not just the baseline UL certifications for testing and so forth, but also 24/7 monitoring, battery monitoring system, requirement that the developer be able to respond to any kind of an issue within 4 hours as a maximum time. Also, a peer review that whatever is proposed and planned was actually built. So we would have to, as a developer, before we can pull a building permit and start construction, submit and get the okay from an independent professional group. So New Leap Energy, you mentioned a number of proposals. So unsurprising now that the interest may have picked up, and maybe in some of your professional lives, you've seen this, where formerly solar developers are now getting involved in battery development. And really that's because a lot of the solar has now, pulled the capacity off of the grid in the places where you can put it. And whereas battery can be put in a much smaller spot and located adjacent to substations, some of these substations where you can't really do solar have available capacity. As of right now, for example, I'm working in, I mentioned Utica, actually neighboring Frankfurt. We just got a permit on 2 batteries there, right adjacent to the substation. I'm also in Syracuse, we're in Troy, all developing at early stages. So the Cedar substation, which is the one that we're interested in, does have 6 megawatts connected of existing what we call DG or distributed generation. That's going to be all solar. And it has roughly 20 megawatts in the queue. So the substation can handle a little over 28 megawatts. So we are really looking at it kind of a question mark here about, what is the, are we going to be able to connect in here and what is the available megawatts? We may be able to take advantage of the minimum load and add that to the 2.5 megawatts that shows up and get close to 5 megawatts. So the proposal really is I think it's a 3-page letter of intent that includes a proposed rent. The lease term for these is long-term, it's 25 years with 4 5-year renewal periods. So this is a big capital upfront investment that includes this long-term lease. And with an escalator, we proposed $35,000 a year as a rent with a 2% escalator. In conversations with Jim and John, we proposed a construction rent time period as well. But to begin with, it's an option period where we would go through National Grid's process and the permitting process of the town of Queensbury. And we propose certain payments, option payments for those individual time periods. And we don't think it'll take the full amount of the 3+ years that we're proposing. We hope not. But we do a lot. We can hope for that because we never know how long National Grid, for example, might take for Queensbury. Lastly, in terms of Queensbury itself, even prior to reaching out to you all, I spoke with the code enforcement officer. And it was an interesting conversation. He said, we don't allow public, so we would be wanting to permit this as a public utility. That would be the mechanism in the town of Queensbury. They have allowed public utilities, I believe, in their industrial zone. But this is a light commercial, I think it is, which is very also light industrial. So we would need a petition for a use variance to allow this, to get permitted on here. The code enforcement officer felt this was a good use, a good idea. I mean, if you're going to locate batteries, have them near the substations and away from residential areas. But the kind of thing where we wouldn't want to it's super helpful to have you all as our partners in this process if we're going to be going through that permitting. Our approach to permitting is very
Supervisor.
Oh, perfect. And we're super helpful to have you in that. So we work closely with a firm and you'll see the letterhead is ESRG. They are the industry experts on fire safety and typically and we're obligated to reach out immediately, of course, the process and work with the fire service to get them comfortable, not just the likelihood, which is small, but in the event of a fire, what do you do? But we have a very hands-on approach in terms of our company because of our experience in New York City. So we are really comfortable with transparency and working really closely with folks. And I think Jim and John will also test that we're pretty persistent. We follow up. So I'll just stop and ask if there are any questions either about our company or the technology or the incentives.
Well, yeah. Orange County is where
Yes.
we know what happened in Orange County.
Yeah, or which is where I live. Yeah.
We don't want that to happen in Queensbury. How are you going to assure that?
So that fire, which as I mentioned was 2 others that happened that summer, is what triggered changes not only to the required technology used, the design, but also the response and the fire suppression. So what I would do is bring in our professional to talk about all of that, but the likelihood of now fires diminished as a result of the new certifications of technology that we're using. And in the handout that I provided, you can see the design of these things and how they're individual modules and then racks that are put into these cabinets. So these cabinets, which are individual, are obviously meant to contain. There's a fire suppression aspect to those. There's this outside monitoring going on so that it can be shut off. There is in the event that a fire were to happen, that would be contained within that cabinet. So and these are, I should say, also these are lithium ion batteries, which are similar to what's in your cell phone. But your question that's a big question you've asked, and I think we need to provide the technical information to an engineer.
Well, we would have a specific forum on that. In fact, I didn't want to start there, but that would be probably the next thing that we do. But the thing that was probably most important to us down is the scale of this. 10,000 square foot deployments as individual, almost containerized units is very different than the design of the places that I have.
Well, my concern is that there were several fires related to lithium. And there were certain costs to the emergency services above and beyond the info, because this is the onion. Who's going to burden those costs?
We'll let you go.
Yeah.
I think here's the thing to remember. There's a substation on the Queensberry Park right now that is carrying a significant amount of power. The substations themselves represent both toxic and fire risk. And so we are already pregnant to some degree with this. The question is whether or not this is a prudent thing to do from both a financial and a safety standpoint. The one thing the reason that we're bringing it forward is it's definitely an efficient use, much more efficient than we have seen. Smaller in scale, essentially tailored to be able to utilize otherwise undeveloped boundaries there that would generate both income and usage that otherwise wouldn't occur. And so it's worth exploring together. One thing we haven't talked about, and we would in greater detail, is there demand for native clean power. The county has invested in significant solar across the street at the airport. And the substation that picks that up is literally the substation that sits on our premise. And if we were to put battery storage there, the opportunity to develop in that park with native clean power exists at scale. Usually those kind of enterprises only exist at hundreds of acres. Somebody could buy a 5-acre lot and be privy to having that kind of agreement. What's that worth and what does that open us to? We're not 100% certain, but it's never really been available up until now. Nobody's ever really said, let's go do 10,000 square foot battery.
I've got a question. Retirement at some point in time, obviously batteries lose their juice. What's that look like for the site? Is this equipment removed? Is this just kind of hang out?
Sure. So that's true. So the efficiency of the battery declines over time, just like the battery in your cell phone. And so upfront, we typically propose an overbuild where we can turn on batteries that are, as the batteries are declining, and swap them out. We just in a similar approach to when you see a solar project come through town, there'd be a decommissioning bond, which would be posted as typical requirement of the permit. And the approach now in the industry now is to come up with ways to recycle these. They're less complex than decommissioning a solar array. These would be there's cabinets that can be hauled away, essentially the batteries repurposed on cement pads.
Right.
How close is this unit to the airport? And would it also inhibit future expansion at the airport?
It wouldn't inhibit future expansion. It's on a small lot adjacent to the substation across the street from the airport.
So, Bob, the county and the EDC own Queensberry Park, which is on the opposite side of the highway there from the airport. I mean, I don't know of any expansion plan I've ever seen that has pushed into that particular area. I'm sorry.
No, but I'm thinking with the FAA say, well, we don't want an expansion of the runway or the facilities at the Glens Falls Airport because of this unit. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there.
It'll require a consultation with the FAA as a result of this, just like through SECR, we'd have to go out to the FAA for any comments that they might have on it.
This was envisioned once the solar development was approved at the county airport. At some point, there would be development of infrastructure around the solar field to be able to bring that transmission into the grid, whether it was battery storage or other switching facilities or whatever. So that discussion that you're having has already begun. It's already initiated. Let's be clear. The EDC has always been a full-throated advocate for the expansion of the airport. And, you know, John and I have talked about this for as long as I've known John. We are an economic development organization. We are not a environmental organization. We are focused specifically on what would bring benefit to the area's economy. And there's no question that investing in expanding our public transportation infrastructure is one of those assets. So we have been unabashed about that for 10 years, and we will continue to be. We would never choose an option that would box us out from that.
On the question that came up, Supervisor, about the fire department, so we'd be in a position to make a contribution financially if they're equipped with the fire department, and or also so in the case of the town of Frankfurt near Utica, we made a contribution to the fire department. We made a contribution for them. It's like a lump sum amount and then an amount for equipment purchases. But yeah, we would have our fire department experts communicate with your fire service, get them educated, and have them then communicate back to the town on their comfort level.
You have an existing facility that's nearby the people from the sport could go see or use somehow.
Yeah, this is a brand new use in upstate New York. So the nearest facility is a bit of a trip. It's down in we have 3 of them in Westchester. The one that you're looking at the front page there is the one that is in it's on Broadway in the town of Parkland, in fact, the church parking lot. So that's closed now as you would see one.
There's also Western Mass.
There likely would be there, not that I'm aware of for us, but yeah.
We would include that as part of whatever our continued due diligence is.
We put together a site plan to, is there a
So the beginning of the process for us is this letter of intent, and it includes the property owner consent form on the back that allows us to make an initial application to National Grid to see if there's even capacity for the project.
okay.
Which is sort of it's always stepwise where you go in terms of how you begin and then work your way through the process. So we can we can set up a way to certainly get you to have your approval prior to submission of the design. We would be running all that by you all, but the beginning point would be this application to National Grid, and then within so many weeks of that, we would send the option to lease, which would have all the terms, and in that option to lease through that process, we would develop our site plan.
Well, if we back up for a second, in order for them to engage in a formal site planning process, there has to be some kind of acknowledgement that we have endorsed that level of exploration, since we are the property owners. So we would essentially say we are in agreement with each other that this is the entity we would like to explore that with. They would then make application to National Grid. That then gives them standing to begin a site planning process. At no point does that commit us to the actual deployment of the facility. It commits us to the process of planning and seeking approval for that. And this is the only one I've ever seen that has warranted us bringing this to your full attention. And I would expect that we will continue to have discussions certainly with you, John, and with the town. But as a board, we have to eventually endorse whether or not we would sign a letter of intent with this particular entity to proceed.
Questions?
I guess at least Jim go tour the facility and maybe take videos and see if the service will go with that.
Yeah,
I want to see what it looks like.
Keeping with our earlier discussion, that craft brewery here, like sign,
We get a buzz.
putting it out there. Let's say my mom.
So let's also be clear that that switch will be a target for battery storage, whether it's on our property or not. Because of the solar development that the county has already invested in across the street, there will be continued inquiry, whether it's from Terrence and his company or others. And so the community is probably well served to step into this to understand it. It's not the only one. There's a switch to it's approximate to the city's property over near Tech Meadows, which we've also talked about in not only with this organization but with others. So I think this is a topic that's going to be around us for a number of years.
I'm sorry. You're gonna stop. The NYSERDA has, to begin with, incentivized 150 megawatt in upstate New York. The total incentive, or the total plan for upstate is 750 megawatts. So we're talking about a 5 megawatt size system here. So you are going to start to see these. Our strategy is to look at places that are near substations and away from residences. I think there needs to be a comfort level with this technology and the level of safety because it's new to here. But I think there's a way to gauge the relative risk of this versus, for example, other more riskier, that, like, for example, the existing substation itself presents its own set of risks, right? So there's nothing that happens that doesn't have a risk associated. But I would say that this has, because of the profile of what happened 2 years ago, the changes that have been recommended and the technology now is really refreshed and up to date. We can go through the process to make sure that you have all the information you need on safety.
Thank you for coming. I think there's a lot of power here. We needed to bring this on to your full awareness. That's what we're speaking of.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
For other business, there's looking to be brought before the board. Is there a need for an executive session? So then I would ask for a motion to adjourn. So move. Second, all in favor? Yeah. And